and welcome to this week's book club episode for Dark Disciple by Christie Golden. If you're not familiar with this series, we're going through this Star Wars book a couple of chapters at a time to dig into the themes and happenings and all of the goings-on. Today we're discussing chapters 2 and 3. With that, let's get into the story itself. We pick up once again in kind of a side story, right? Like when in the first chapter, we're experiencing the story from the perspective of a character who is not one of the main characters in the novel. We are once again doing that in chapter 2. We are seeing basically the reveal of Quinlan Vos. This is the point where, maybe as the reader, if this is kind of your introduction to Quinlan, you might not know what's going on. Maybe as a savvy reader and a knower of how stories work, you'd be able to figure it out. But you wouldn't necessarily know if you were watching the Clone Wars, like if this were an episode of the Clone Wars and you had seen the previous episode with Quinlan, then you would obviously know what's going on. I liked how this whole scene worked. I don't know enough about the backstory with the book. I know that this book is developed and adapted from scripts for the Clone Wars, but I don't know specifically what scenes were in the show and what scenes were created for the book, because obviously it's going to flow different in a different medium. So I don't know if this exchange was something that happened in the show or if it's something that Christie Golden came up with, but either way, it's something that would have fit perfectly within the Clone Wars. Reading it, I could envision the episode I would have seen, and the action worked exactly like the show. The humor worked exactly like the show. And I like that the book is really keeping the spirit of the show. It's obviously its own thing. It's obviously a novel and not just a script. And again, like I said, I don't know if this was originally in the scripts or not, but the energy of the series is there. And I thought that was cool. And I just liked the humor of it all as Quinlan, as Tall, I guess, is his undercover name, kind of comes in and when he eventually has to reveal himself as a Jedi and he's holding the one guy in the air and bantering with the other guy, and I thought it flowed really well, and it was a really good kind of reveal. As an audience member, be it a viewer or a reader, it's always fun when we know something that the characters don't know, unless it's terrifying or heartbreaking that we know something that the characters don't know. But in this case, it was we're reading from the perspective of a terrible person, and the writing makes it clear that this guy is up to no good. And we're oh, there's the Jedi. He's coming in. He's gonna do Jedi things. And if you know about Quinlan, then you can kind of guess where this is going. And so I thought it worked really well, both as an introduction, if this is you meeting the character, because, this very easily could have been if you were a Star Wars fan who were really into the books and you're not as into the show, this might have been your introduction to series lore. So it worked really well, I think, if you are reading it for the first time and you don't necessarily know what's going on. And I think it worked really well if you are an avid fan of the show, or at least had seen the episode, to kind of see how that goes about. There is one part where the guy yells, "No blasters, no blasters," and that makes me think of Wooer from A New Hope, so it was kind of a cool reference too. But as much as this was fun, it sets up a very interesting part of Quinlan's character. It plays into something that we kind of saw a lot in the Clone Wars. It's one of those questions that comes up in Star Wars a lot, where on the surface level, it can just be fun if you want it to be, but at a deeper level, it could have a very serious connotation. And that's kind of the adventure and excitement of the Jedi during the Clone Wars, and kind of the arrogance that can come from them. So if you're just reading this is fun, right? Here's a guy who's done bad things. He's a villain. We know he's a villain because we're seeing the story from his perspective, and from his perspective with his side of things, it's very clear that he's bad. It's not like he's somebody being judged by the narration. His own thoughts are doing that. And he's somebody that we want to see stopped, and so then the Jedi comes in and does cool Force stuff. And if you're into Star Wars for the Jedi doing cool Force stuff, then this works for you. But there's also this underlying question of the Jedi Order, and you can either levy this at Quinlan to see him as being kind of an offbeat, kind of maverick character, but when we see him interact with Obi-Wan in the show, in Chapter 3, the way that the Jedi as a whole, maybe iffy on the Council, because the Council's always iffy, but the Jedi as a whole really like Quinlan, and embrace those more rogue personality types and the seeking of adventure and excitement. It shows you some of where the Jedi at times kind of lose themselves, and how so often like dark sidiness is characterized as like selfishness, brooding, anger, outbursts, that sort of thing, where Quinn just likes to have a good time. And that's going to play into themes as we go on, because this whole book with him working with Ventress is going to kind of be themes of like shades of the dark side and that sort of thing. Again, because it's been a couple of years since I read the book, I don't necessarily remember all of how that plays out, but it's absolutely a carry, like a through line through the novel. But that's something I like to look at with the Jedi, and that's something I appreciate about Star Wars on the whole, is it can be the fun popcorn flick. Like any of the movies, any of the 11 like live action, theatrical, whatever movies, any of the TV shows, any of the books, really, like they can be pop stories, they can be pulp stories if you want them to be, and then almost all of them, if not all of them, have this deeper root that you can look for. And that's, I think Clone Wars did that really well, and I think this novel is starting to do that really well. So there isn't a whole lot to say about this second chapter, other than it was an introduction, and it did its part, but I thought it was a really fun one. I really liked the droid having it come up with the synonyms for blue. Nothing like messing with a temperamental protocol droid in Star Wars. Then we had chapter 3, and chapter 3 is where we have a little bit more meat to talk about. Voss returns to the temple. We see he's a light guy. As I said, he's popular, even though he isn't always there. There was one line I thought was really interesting, which is, all Jedi came here at some point. And this was Voss referring to the Jedi Temple. I might be misunderstanding the line. It could mean that all Jedi came here at some point, and that some point being the beginning. But it seems to imply that not all Jedi may have their training on the temple on Coruscant, which was absolutely true in Legends. And of course, when these scripts were written, Legends wasn't Legends, it was canon. So this novel, even though it's in the new canon, was being built off of stuff that was being expressly written for old canon. And so maybe that's something of a holdover. But I think it's cool if it's still a thing. And maybe there is in other sources and I'm either forgetting or not realizing. But just the idea that there were other Jedi temples throughout the galaxy, which is true in current canon, but that not every Jedi trained on Coruscant. And I like that a lot. But that's just a throwaway line that doesn't really get pulled into a lot of it, but it's just one of those things. I like lines in novels that open canon doors. Star Wars is often accused of making the galaxy smaller because there's always cameos and connections. I understand that argument. I ultimately like connections, but I agree that you can overdo it, even though my definition of overdoing it is very different from a lot of people's. But I love lines that will also open the door to things in canon. And so that, to me, even though it's one sentence and a whole book, is a sentence that opens the door. It creates options of like, hey, someday we could tell this story about what about the Jedi who don't start on Coruscant. Quinlan finds Obi-Wan, who is heavily burdened, as he often is in life. We see a lot of the next part of the chapter from Obi's perspective, but Obi's kind of describing what Voss would be going through. I don't have any reason to think Obi would be wrong about it. And it kind of has Voss wondering why Mace is speaking instead of Yoda. And I really like that because we know why. We read the first chapter. We know that it's awkward because this whole assassinate Dooku business is really Mace's idea. And Yoda's kind of begrudgingly going along with it. Not like with an arm tied behind his back, or no one's twisting his ear, but it's a thing that he doesn't want to have to do, but he recognizes he thinks is necessary. So it makes sense that Mace is speaking. And I like that because anything that creates levels of knowledge for the audience is fun for me. So whether it's the beginning of chapter 2, where we know that the guy is actually Quinlan Voss, or here, where we know why there's a tension in the room and Quinlan doesn't. I like that kind of thing. I think it's a way to keep the audience involved as you're revealing information, because it can be really hard to do an info dump, and it can be really hard when characters are at different information levels. And so we know things, and we don't necessarily want to watch Quinlan get the same information we already have, because we've already gotten that information. But then if it's a reasonable time of Quinlan getting that information, but instead of reiterating exposition, it becomes a character moment of us experiencing Quinlan experience it. That is a way to kind of smooth things over when you have these scenes where different characters have to play catch up. And so I really like just a line like that, where it really didn't need to have been there. It would have been very easy, I think, to write this chapter and not think about that. But just the inclusion of noticing that Mace is talking instead of Yoda, even though we would know why, and maybe it wouldn't be weird to the reader, pointing that out makes you go, oh yeah, there's things afoot that not everybody knows. But this part of the story shows that you can never really pretend you know what the Wizened Jedi Master is going to do, and he kind of throws something out there that, like, as dangerous as it is, there should be 2 people who go, and goes as far as to recommending Ventress go, even though Anakin is, of course, volunteering, because Anakin would love to volunteer, which is a whole other thing. Of course, Anakin would want to do it. Anakin would want to go after Dooku. Anakin would have that kind of impulsiveness to do it, but also he would be super recognizable, and the whole undercover thing would not really work out. So Yoda's like, 2 people are going to go, and one of them's going to be Ventress, and everyone is like, what? And Obi-Wan is like, huh? But then they're like, it's not a bad idea. And so then that becomes the plan. Voss, of course, wants to go alone. He's used to going alone. He is the likable, charming, charismatic, but roguish, alone, strong, silent type, as is often good with these type of protagonists, especially for where the story is going. Obi-Wan is actually kind of in favor of this. Even though Obi-Wan's not in favor of the plan at large, like, this change in it, he can get behind. I also like the way Yoda is talking like he seems to know Voss is going to need Ventress. Like, he has had some sort of vision or nudging from the Force that it's important, and that the Jedi respect that. The Council as a whole can kind of just tell when Yoda is in one of his moods, and he just kind of knows what the actual right thing is to do. Voss agrees. He has this line of, I'm not sure Ventress will survive, because the implication being he might take out Dooku and her, which is an interesting line, because one, it's like, oh, so you think you can take out both really dangerous people that have not been successfully killed up until this point, but also the point of he's kind of not really against being out for blood, in a way. At the end, Voss says, he cracks a joke on his way out the door, and Yoda isn't offended by Voss's humor, seems to kind of enjoy the jovialness of it in a dark moment. But then the best part of this chapter is Voss gets cleaned up, and he's hanging with his buddy Desh, and Desh is concerned about him but leaves so he and Obi can talk, and they have this amazing conversation where Obi-Wan's like, look, when you fight Ventress, you should flirt a little bit. Or he says banter, and Voss is like, flirting? And it's funny because, like, I mean, this goes back to the Clone Wars movie that came out in 2008. There's this part where Ventress and Obi-Wan are about to fight, and Ventress does, like, this big dramatic flail, and Obi-Wan's like, oh, well, hello there. They've had this kind of banter throughout the show that's absolutely stellar, even though, of course, Obi-Wan's heart truly belongs to Satine, and also the Jedi and democracy. But Satine, I love the kind of the ship name is Wantress dialogue that pops up throughout the show. And so it was really funny to hear Obi-Wan, like, express that, and have Voss kind of call him out on it a bit. Just all in all, it was a really interesting part of the chapter. But that's all I have to talk to you guys about this week. This was a lot of the kind of getting the car moving kind of chapters. For next week, let's read 4, 5, and 6. So we'll read 3 chapters, 4, 5, and 6 for next Monday. If you're not already, please follow us on the various socials and get in touch. Please leave me a comment letting me know what you think of the reading so far, and I will talk to you guys next week.